If you're not on the big five running backs in the 2020 rookie class, this is still one of the best rookie drafts in recent memory. Welcome to the Football Guys Dynasty Show. I'm your host, Chad Parsons. And a lot of the attention is paid, as it should be, to the top running backs in the 2020 class. But if you're sitting there at 106, you're sitting there at 107, 108, this still, and Jordan, you can back me up on this because we do deep dives, we look at historical trends, and yet you can sit there at 106, 107, 108 in a one quarterback league, and you're getting a round one pedigree wide receiver. You're getting a top 5, top 10% metric profile, and you're getting some pretty nice landing spots in general in conjunction with said players. And a lot of times these are profiles that are going 102, 103, 104. Typically 101 is reserved for that blue chip Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, ideally running back. I didn't really get that. Didn't get the top 5, top 10 pedigree with the running backs. But the point is the running backs are going early, but yet you might feel like you're on the outside looking in at 6, 7, 8, but yet you're getting a blue chip profile. So you may feel like, I'm not getting the prettiest girl at prom, but man, like I am really up in my level here, and I'm getting the second tier, so to speak, is still very, very good within the 2020 class.
Yeah, I'm Jordan McNamara. I agree with all that, Chad. And I think the receiving landing spots are, I think, pretty good as well. And we like, I think you and I like Jalen Reagor the best amongst this class. But I think everyone has a pretty good argument in terms of Judy and CeeDee Lamb as well. Justin Jefferson is also in there. There's varying opinions on him. I think I like his metric case a little bit better than I think you do. I'm a fan of the profile. So I view that as a tier of 4. I know that there's some differences in there about how people rank them, but by and large, I think that the first round, it's pretty good. And when you look out a year, not quite as confident in it. I will say if after you get to that later part of that first round, I think there is some value in moving out of there. And especially if you're a contending team, you're drafting 110, 111, 112, somewhere in that range, and you're a contending team, and you're sort of staring either Justin Jefferson in the face or one of the maybe a third or fourth wide receiver on the board. The option to trade out of there is actually pretty interesting this year. So you have trades going down for example, Julio Jones for 110 and 203. You get Julio Jones and 212 for 110 and 310. So you get that in that range is where you can start to get these. If you're a contending team coming out of last year, picking your pick at 10, 11, 12, in that range, there is still demand for people to get into that range, whether that's Henry Ruggs or Keyshawn Vaughn or, maybe a player that you and I aren't quite as high on. There is still a market demand for them and plenty of opportunity to move out and get a better profile, more productive profile from trading that pick.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So if you don't have a strong target player in that zone, and first what I would say is if you do have a strong player, whether it's beyond those first 3 wide receivers or Justin Jefferson or, like you said, 111 or so to 203, 204, 205, if you have a strong preference, first of all, it's a big jumble. So you better take your guy earlier rather than later in that zone, because there is much more ambiguity in the ADP and what you're likely to see draft to draft in that zone than saying, oh, well, I'm going to sit at 6 and I really want one of those 5 running backs and I think I'm going to get them there. That's not a good probability play. That's not a good draft plan. That means you need to trade up if you want to ensure a Cam Akers or DeAndre Swift or whatever is your flavor. So the zones at 9 to the mid-second are much less defined on where players go. I've seen Justin Jefferson go ahead of one of the other 3 wide receivers. I've also seen Justin Jefferson at 202, 203. It's happened. So you need to be okay with that variance and embrace it, because if you have a guy in that range and you have a pick of 204, do not count on specific player, wide receiver, running back X at 204. You may sit there and take them at 110 and then say, well, at 204, I'll take my chances with best player available of my second tier or my non-preferred, let's call it, of that zone. So I think that is a really important zone. And you laid out some contender trades, which we kind of talked about before the draft and right after the draft of, man, what a great year, because you can sit there and get a round 1 wide receiver with a good profile. Maybe you get Jalen Reagor slipping to you at like a 10. I mean, you were right there for the title game last year if that's your natural position. In the late first, early second, you're getting a much better profile than some of these poor classes that we've had sprinkled throughout the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, could you imagine in classes, in years past? I mean, Jalen Reagor probably could have been the wide receiver 1 almost consensus wise in like 2 out of 3 of the last classes of the last 3 years. And you just think about, he's in what, some people he's 1, some people he's 4, right? I mean, that's just a good class where you actually have that debate. I'll even say beyond there, you get into the second round, and a player that I've liked a lot is Brandon Aiyuk, and he is falling off that tier. He's in that next tier with guys like T. Higgins and Henry Ruggs, and sort of how that all range, Denzel Mims, guys like that. Aiyuk, you're still getting that first round pedigree, and he doesn't have the same elite metric profile that a guy like Ruggs, or excuse me, that a guy like Reagor or Jefferson or Lamb might have, but he's still that first round wide receiver. And it's historically pretty rare to have a first round wide receiver in the NFL slip to round 2 of a second round rookie draft ADP, especially in start 1 leagues. You've only seen, it's like 5 or 6 since 2008. And so that just is an indication of how good this class is, that is happening with regularity, that he's falling there. That's just it's a historical rarity. So you're going to collect that pedigree in that range. I mean, that's just a really good range to be building your team some depth in that spot of the draft.
Yeah, Brandon Aiyuk kind of reminds me of, and Jordan is the bigger cyclist of the two of us. We both do actually cycle for fun. I would say it's actually transportation for me. I'm sure Jordan a little bit is transportation. But
there's not much fun in it when you're going uphill.
Well, I was gonna say, Brandon Aiyuk is going downhill. Brandon Aiyuk is the Jordan equivalent to cycling downhill, and guess what? The bottom of the hill is a Starbucks. So that would be that's the equivalent of being able to just sit sometimes at 202, 204 sometimes. I've gotten him at 16, 17 overall before, where people are going Denzel Mims, people are going Michael Pittman, a ton of guys before Brandon Aiyuk. And part of it is, I think, he was a JUCO guy, transferred, wasn't really on the Devy or NFL landscape until very late in his career. And then all of a sudden, he's kind of a surprise pick. He goes to a situation where it's a lot of system, right? People view it as duplication of what Deebo Samuel offers. And it's just, it's always interesting. And we always kind of gravitate towards who's the guy that's falling, like Alexander Madison a year ago, or James Conner, where it's like, who has that ugly spot of just like, they're falling. Why are they falling? What's the reason? Is it just sort of a market value stink? And there always seems to be 1 or 2 guys. It's round 2, maybe it seeps into round 3. And I find it interesting. It seems like Aiyuk is just the guy that's been missing out typically when you get to, and that's what I meant by being flexible. If you are flexible in these 5 or 6 players, it's like you kind of got to be okay at 203, 204, 205. Be like, hey, Brandon Aiyuk, you're my guy. That I'm going to take the pedigree. I'm going to take the well-rounded profile. I'm going to take the conducive situation, and this thing could break right, just as it could break right for T. Higgins being the number 1 wide receiver for the Bengals in 2021, etc. I mean, there's arguments for each of them. And to me, historically, betting on profiles, if I'm getting any bit of a discount, like for example, I drafted T. Higgins begrudgingly in one of my leagues at 201, and I ended up trading, getting something in addition, and traded down to 203. I wasn't able to trade 201. Apparently, I sniped T. Higgins from somebody, so I traded down to 203. Got Brandon Aiyuk, who I was basically right there neck and neck going to draft him at 201. Got an early 3rd round pick next year to shift down and operate within that tier. And I think operating within a tier is very important for dynasty drafters, whether it's a startup or a rookie draft.
Yeah, and if you're stacking profiles together, this year that's the perfect range to just say, hey, I'll just take the residual, whatever, whoever sort of falls to me as I move down. If you don't have a strong preference in that range, this is an excellent year to sort of move within that range, slide back a little bit, and grab a couple more players or a couple additional picks. I'll also say, like, Cole Clement as tight end 1 in this class, I mean, consistently really late second, early third round. I don't think it's a great tight end class overall, but you get a top 50 tight end. Granted, he's going to a tight end situation that they haven't been able to fix no matter what they've invested in that tight end spot, whether it's day 2 picks or whether it's tens of millions of dollars. They just haven't been able to fix it. So maybe he can break that trend. But that opportunity, that profile in that late second, early third round, it just is evidence of how good this class is when you keep getting those benchmarkers as late as they are.
Yeah, and I know one thing that you preach about pedigree is, if you're getting to the late second round and you can get a first round tight end, and this year you can typically get a look at Joe Burrow, Tua, and then you get to the late third round sometimes, and you get a crack at Justin Herbert. You're getting a lot of equity there. At let's face it, some non-optimal, ugly, unsexy positions, typically in a start 1 league, without super premiums or things like that going on at quarterback and tight end. But you're collecting pedigree, and some of your other options might be really ugly metric profile day 2 wide receivers, maybe even day 3 wide receivers and day 3 running backs. I was faced with that situation. It's like, sometimes you just gotta, I'm going to sit there and take the number 1 overall pick in the draft, Joe Burrow. This is Chad Parsons and Jordan McNamara. We're at episode 4 of the Footballguys Dynasty show. And Jordan, we talked about running backs last week with your Dynasty rankings up at footballguys.com. It's wide receiver week. And that's an exciting one because there are a ton of profiles that are they're not sexy. These are profiles that have been productive. And I think you're going to see a theme between some of the wide receivers we're going to talk about this week, where you are outliers amidst the Footballguys consensus. The first one is Mr. Odell Beckham Jr. Talk about a divergence from what his early career was to specifically what 2019 was. But we a lot of times like to look at the long-term picture for a wide receiver and kind of what that means going forward.
Yeah, we talked, I think it was Aaron Rodgers a couple of weeks ago, and we were like, sometimes you just take the guy that's on the Hall of Fame track and just move on and don't really think much of it. Maybe Odell Beckham's not exactly there right now, but that's the strata in which he is. But for a little bit of injury and some I think just bad situation last year, I mean, that's essentially where he was to start his career. And you're getting a discount because there was the failed experiment with Freddie Kitchens, and Baker Mayfield didn't live up, had some accuracy problems, had some of those issues last year that we didn't really expect. Everyone was expecting him to be the Oracle, and had the sophomore slump, which happens. Now we can sort of turn the page. You get a different coaching staff in terms of Kevin Stefanski's going to come in. He presents the opportunity to be a little bit more stable and work a better system than I think was in place last year. Get some more development out of Baker. There's talk they're going to run more play action and all of the opportunities that presents in terms of elevating Odell Beckham in terms of opportunity. I think you consistently in like the late third to fourth round in drafts that I've done and drafts that I'm tracking in terms of ADP in Superflex. I mean, that is just a really, really good profile in that range. I think I've done 2 startups this year. I think I've got them in both in the fourth round of startup drafts. And in terms of building that strategy out of, let's be efficient at the wide receiver position with really good profiles, I just think Odell Beckham Jr. is a great representation of a great profile at a discount this year.
To me, it's all recency bias. It's all what happened last year, and let's totally boost a guy or penalize a guy based solely on what happened last year. I think you outlined it well. Of situation plays a role. In terms of profiles, I have a mic drop. Like if I was having a bar argument with somebody about Odell Beckham and someone comes at me and says he stinks, here's my mic drop moment, fantasy wise. 6 seasons, he's had 5 top 10 finishes in points per game. I don't know what else you want other than, I guess, doing it again, a 6th straight year. This is someone that came in, little bit of injury rookie year, And he's been absolute fantasy nails on a per game basis from that moment until 2019. The only wide receivers dating back to the mid 90s to put up 5+ wide receiver one seasons in the first 6 years, Randy Moss, Julio Jones. And when you kind of mentioned, maybe some twists and turns of how their career has gone, Randy Moss is kind of the perfect example, right? Definitely was not a straight to Cooperstown going upward on the, I almost think of the Price is Right. The, what is it? The cliffhanger game or the mountain climber. I think it's the mountain climber. He just keeps climbing up and then eventually they fall off the cliff. Well, it doesn't go that way. It's like stocks, right? It doesn't just go straight up. That's not how life works. And Julio Jones actually has been pretty close to that in terms of just lock and load every single year. Boy, isn't he great? But Randy Moss has changed teams. He actually had a little bit of a hiatus before he gets back with the Patriots, I remember, in 2007 and resurrects things, those Raiders years. So the point is, both of those guys, and Julio Jones is still counting, but they put up 2 more wide receiver one seasons. Odell Beckham is pretty much right there in the midpoint of his career. And again, he's around wide receiver 10 plus or minus, 2-3 spots maybe in the consensus. And he's behind guys like, you tell me who has the better resume, Odell Beckham or Chris Godwin, DJ Moore, AJ Brown. We're projecting a lot from those types who have maybe done it once, maybe done it for a partial season, maybe not done it at all, to the level of Odell Beckham doing it for 5 years. So again, I don't know how this works out with Baker Mayfield. I do, change is good for teams that are seeking more positivity and upgrades. So situationally, I'm basically saying I trust the player, I trust the talent. He's 27 years old. Let's do this, as opposed to saying, it needs to be situationally perfect for one of the all-time players over the last 20, 25 years to have a rebound year. I mean, to me, that feels like almost the expected outcome unless things go completely haywire again. And we've even seen that with Randy Moss and things turn out okay.
Yeah, and the players that you mentioned in terms of Chris Godwin and AJ Brown, talk about recency bias, right? Both ends of that, right? Odell Beckham Jr. has a down season. AJ Brown and Chris Godwin have really good seasons on unrepeatable efficiency, right? So that, both good seasons, don't get me wrong, but both of them were at levels of efficiency that they're probably not going to repeat their output on what their targets were last year. Godwin right around 120. You're not going to expect a top 5 wide receiver finish out of a wide receiver like that at that target volume very often. So I just think you're getting basically both recency bias is driving down Beckham's price and is driving up the other guys. And I think it's just a classic opportunity to bet. You're basically betting on regression in both senses. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, a couple recent Odell Beckham trades that stood out for me is, and talk about, again, projecting a lot from something that hasn't occurred for much at all, is Odell Beckham for 106. So again, you're getting your top wide receiver most likely from the 2020 class. That you're getting the age advantage. You're getting a 21-year-old player, but Odell Beckham, again, he's done it 5 out of 6 years. And even his 6th season was wide receiver 30 something. So the point is, even his down year was startable, had moments, and there's uncertainty with a rookie receiver coming into the league, no matter how much you like the player. The other one is Odell Beckham in 207 for AJ Brown in 304. You're getting something on top of AJ Brown. AJ Brown is one of the hottest dynasty assets and wide receivers out there. And the fact that you can leverage this into a not 32-year-old, we're not talking rolling AJ Brown into into AJ Green. We're talking about getting Odell Beckham at 27 years old, plus moving in a tier from 304 to 207. And that could be very impactful for what players are available to you. Do want to mention that never miss a moment of the Football Guys show content by subscribing to Football Guys TV on YouTube. And the recent episodes have been very impactful. If you are into IDP, they just had Sigmund Bloom on the IDP show with John Norton, who is one of my big go-to resources there at Football Guys for IDP. They had Matt Schauf. He was also on, and long before I was a Football Guys staff, as I mentioned. I mean, they were a go-to resource for me there at Football Guys with their projections, being able to navigate the waiver wire, and be able to stream, which is a huge thing in IDP land. Also, redraft strategy with Sigmund Bloom. He was on the couch with JJ Zachariason. So those are notable episodes. Do want to tell you to get the Football Guys daily email update by Joe Bryant. Today, for example, just got some good news about Stephon Diggs as a potential deep threat there with the Bills. Also, Phillip Rivers, there's optimism that he could be more than a one-year play with the Colts. So this is dynasty information you need to know, and especially as things get moving towards a potential and likely fingers crossed 2020 season. Again, this is information that unless you're scouring other news avenues, and again, you don't need to do that. This is something that it gets consolidated and put into your email inbox. So again, sign up for that free daily email update at footballguys.com/free. And Jordan, the other player that the other wide receiver you're notably high on compared to the Football Guys staff consensus there in the dynasty rankings is another player, similar ilk, and actually teammate now to Odell Beckham, Mr. Jarvis Landry.
Yeah, I'm the only person that has him above 33, and I've got him at 22. Listen, sometimes it's not hard in terms of what happens consistently at wide receiver is what we see is guys that produce keep doing it. Right. And so one of the things, like when you look at the wide receivers in this class, for example, I was looking at some stats before the show. 53% of wide receivers drafted in the first round of the NFL draft hit for a top 24 seasonal finish. 70% of those hit again, right? So that's 30% of them are one-hit wonders. So that means 41% of first-round wide receivers hit for two or more times as top 24 seasonal finishes. That's not a high number, right? That people think that it's higher than that, and it's not that high. And so when you look at guys like Odell Beckham Jr., like Jarvis Landry, that are on consistently productive tracks, Jarvis Landry was a top 15 wide receiver last year. And it's I guess if a wide receiver produces a huge season in Cleveland and no one's paying attention, it's kind of like a tree in a forest. Does anyone
doesn't
hear
make
it?
a sound, Jordan?
Right?
It doesn't make a dynasty sound.
Doesn't make a sound. I guess the caution that I would have is he has some medical issues in terms of surgery. Training camps in question, we'll sort of see with that. That's something to monitor. But I think at the cost, which is in the 30s, you're talking 6th, 7th, 8th round of startup drafts, 9th, 10th. I've seen him slide to. I mean, that's pretty affordable in terms of what you're looking for in that range. And he's going behind, he's going just very, very cheap in terms of all of those things, in terms of the durability of his profile. And I think you are going to get, by and large, I think you don't have a third weapon in Cleveland, in terms of wide receivers. It's really a two-man show. You do have some tight end production in terms of Njoku and Hooper, and you have good running backs in terms of Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. I tend to think Kareem Hunt's going to take a step back in terms of volume this year because of the scheme change. And I think that gives a lot of volume to the outside to both Beckham and Jarvis Landry. And I think you're going to see some growth from Baker Mayfield. I'm not necessarily betting on Baker Mayfield and a super flex, for example, making a big investment in him, but I don't really need a huge fantasy season for Baker Mayfield to make Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham very profitable in terms of what their costs are. I think those are two different things. You have to divorce them a little bit in terms of the type of investment you're making. But yeah, I mean, the more and more I've studied the wide receiver position, give me the guys that have done it, and that for some reason are going at a discount and a just bargain shop in terms of that range. So Jarvis Landry in the 20s makes a ton of sense for me.
Yeah, when you were saying those figures for a top 24 season out of young wide receivers and incoming rookies, in my adjusted points per game, Landry has been wide receiver 26 or better each of the last 5 years. So he's done it 5 times, basically, plus or minus a couple spots there. And the point is, a wide receiver, what you were outlining is their first rounders are kind of 50-50, to kind of get on that track to start to do that. Something Landry, and we mentioned already with Beckham to a higher level, has been doing for basically their whole career. And they're on the same team. Yeah, they might siphon a little bit of upside, but the point is you're buying the profiles, and that you're going to see that theme coming up over and over again of buying profiles. Jarvis Landry had a year in the top half of wide receiver ones. And what I like about, and I've actually warmed up, Chad from 2015 was not of this way of thinking. I would go after the boom bust guys, the Brashad Perrimans. Boy, look at that athleticism. But, I've really come to marvel and enjoy watching technicians, Jarvis Landry, Keenan Allen, these guys that have some athletic limitations, these overt physical traits, but you know what they do well? They can run a route. They can run a route that you could tell a story about, from some time in their college career, that they know how to get open. They know the nuances that even if you're not an in-depth NFL level scout, you can watch and you can see how they're setting up defenders. If you watch them, on a snap to snap basis, the first 5 to 10 yards, you see how they're stacking a defender. You don't have to be, and all of a sudden now that you're controlling them because they're on your hip, you don't have to know the most high level scouting terminology and some of those very advanced details to see guys like Keenan Allen, Jarvis Landry, and others that they don't run a 4-4. They may not even run a 4-5-5, but what do? They know the nuances and the subtleties of playing the position, running a route, separating despite those limitations. Because why? They've never been the fastest guy on the field. They've been doing this since high school. Right. They might have been, oh, you can't play defensive back. You're not fast enough. Oh, I'm going to play wide receiver. Like some of these stories of these players. So I've become to really appreciate the Keenan Allen, Jarvis Landry types as they've aged, because what do I like? The falling price. Landry's, these two trades that I found, these are in the, so I mean, it's worse. Landry, it's better than the Odell Beckham ones because he's even more affordable. You get Jarvis Landry for Anthony Miller and a second next year. I mean, what are the odds either of those ever produce a top 30 season?
Right.
I don't know. Let's go
really
into the Jordan calculator, right? 17.12%, probably even lower. Jarvis Landry in 302 for Deshaun Jackson. Didn't know he was traded anymore. Guess he still is something viable. Maybe that just evened out the players. 202 and 312. So you're basically trading 202 for Jarvis Landry in a third. Unbelievable. So 202, again, that's Brandon Aiyuk zone. You can like whatever player you want at 202. Jarvis Landry is just lock in a double. Lock in a double with triple upside right there. You may not hit a home run with that trade, but you're locking in a hardy profit such a high percentage of the time that I think it's important for people to realize, even if you love rookie picks, there is a market. You mentioned with Julio Jones and some of these opportunities for not true rebuilding teams in that late first, early second. These are the types of deals and types of players available to you, but you got to go knock on those doors.
Yeah, I looked. I have a metric I call base rate, which is just pedigree compared with how long you've been in the NFL. Anthony Miller's base rate of producing a top 24 season in the future, 22%. And I would take the under by a pretty significant margin on that. And so when you just look at Landry for that cost, I mean, man, it's a bargain. And from a roster construction perspective, I mean, there's a lot of talk going around in the fantasy community about upside, sort of how that matters. From a roster construction perspective, having that the consistency at wide receiver year over year in terms of baseline production is incredibly important to maximizing upside at other positions, because you can spend less roster spots. So guys like Jarvis Landry make a lot of sense in that calculus where they might not necessarily do so at running back, for example.
Yeah. And I love what you just hit there, which is you can save roster spots. If you're trying to replicate a Jarvis Landry in terms of being a just rock solid wide receiver 2, 3, 4 on your depth chart for a dynasty roster, if you're trying to replicate that with Anthony Miller and 2 or 3 other guys of just saying, man, I hope one of them kind of turns into a Jarvis Landry, you can kind of make a trade to where instead of rostering 6, 7 wide receivers, maybe you got 4 or 5. It really kind of saves you spots to maybe optimize it. If it's super flex, you take a shot on a backup quarterback instead. So it's almost an ancillary part of the deal that I think goes overlooked and ignored a lot of times, or a backup running back when we get closer and have full clarity of depth charts, or in 2 tight end leagues. There's just a number of circumstances where you really want to be lean and mean, and Jarvis Landry is a critical part of that, and just his dependability, whether he's right there in your lineup, or maybe he's that next guy up for bye weeks and all that injury away type status for your own depth chart, or maybe you only start 3 guys.
Yeah,
all right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's talk some dynasty trading, because again, putting the rubber to the road in terms of actually putting this into effect. So we always like to talk about different scopes, different ideas for trading. And also wanted to mention, this is Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 4 of the Football Guys Dynasty show. So we're going to try to focus on some dynasty trades each and every week, because it highlights some strategy. And this is really, other than drafting and other than the waiver wire, this is the biggest way you affect your team. And honestly, you have availability to it 10, 11 months out of the year. So that's why it's so important to give listeners ideas and concepts to apply to your own leagues and maybe different players, but the same rules apply. So this is one that I observed in one of my leagues, and it is a 2 quarterback league. And I am just getting familiar with the league as I took over an orphan, but this is someone who was shopping Ezekiel Elliott, looking to probably get a quarterback, but also looking to rebuild and resculpt their team. They gave up Ezekiel Elliott, Jameis Winston, and Phillip Rivers. So a couple of quarterbacks there, only one starting as of now, and Ezekiel Elliott, who, I don't know, Jordan, maybe if you have thoughts on this, please let me know why there's a stink around Ezekiel Elliott. Is it that he's 30? I just checked his birthday again. He's not Danny Almonte. He's not he's a legal age. He's actually a legal NFL prime running back age at 25 for this coming season. I thought he might have been 28, 29, or Le'Veon Bell. I thought maybe he was transported into the body of Le'Veon Bell with this trade. And all that was traded for Josh Allen, Raheem Mostert, McCole Hardman, and 309. The floor is yours, my friend.
Man, talk about taking a loss on Zeke. Listen, we talked about Winston last week in terms of the upside and what he could offer in terms of a rebound, in the track of guys that have thrown for 5,000 yards. Yes, I get there's problems, right? He is not in the same stability class is what I'll say, is some of the guys that have done that. But you talked about the eye surgery and being able to actually see that matters. And so he's going to go to a situation that's going to make him better and develop. We have it's not out yet, but we did a roundtable in terms of Football Guy staffers on quarterbacks. And I was surprised. I'm pretty bullish on Phillip Rivers, and I was surprised at how many people were sort of with that in terms of what he could offer this year in terms of upside. He had a pretty inefficient year in terms of touchdowns last year and still finished in the top 16 at the position. So I like that in terms of this year as well. You're giving up a top 10 asset in the start 2 quarterback league in Zeke, and for Josh Allen and Mostert and Hardman and 309. Listen, I like Josh Allen.
You're in the Buffalo area, just to be transparent. You are very close, and you cover them for Football Guys, so you know him well.
I recap the Bills for Football Guys and have done it for Josh Allen's entire career. I will say this about Josh Allen. You and I were both not very bullish on Josh Allen coming out. And then essentially his cost dropped so much that it went to the exact opposite way. We were kind of like, we have to be in at this cost, right? Sort of like you talked about with Herbert earlier, when as a top 10 quarterback going in the late third or fourth round of a start 1 league, you have to take them. When they're going in the second round of a super flex rookie draft, you have to take that, right? Those were sort of the price points for Josh Allen that we just had to be on because he was so cheap. From that point, I think he's gotten better. He has developed as a passer, right? He actually, people rag on him because of the deep ball accuracy, but between 5 to 15 yards, he's actually above average. And so he struggles in the short range and he struggles in the deep game, but in that high efficiency range, he's actually above average. So he's taking a step forward, but man, you're taking a loss, right? I mean, you're just taking a loss on Zeke. You have all the upside in terms of Winston and Rivers, and you're betting on 3 profiles that aren't very good long-term. You look at Raheem Mostert, he's coming out of the top 200 in terms of offseason ADP last year. The hit rate on that is incredibly low. I mean, you're looking 1 or 2% on that, right? It's just a rare thing to have those guys truly come and establish themselves at sometime in the next 24 months. It just doesn't really happen. Hardman, listen, I like the attachment to Mahomes. The problem is you're just not going to have the volume, and you're giving up Zeke, right? The combination of those things, I have a hard time with that. Give me the Zeke side pretty significantly. And when you're rebuilding, don't rebuild around bad profiles. Rebuild around good ones that are depressed in price, right? Don't rebuild around the undrafted free agent who's on his 7th team and broke out in after week 10 last year. Don't bet on the day 2 wide receiver who doesn't have a great metric profile, right? Bet on good profiles to bounce back or to increase in value. Don't bet on bad ones and try and do it in a volume way.
Yeah, and the couple things I would add to that evaluation is when you are dealing the best player. Now, by this construction, it almost seems like Josh Allen is the best player. So that may be a disagreement point between the executioner of this trade, the team trading away Ezekiel Elliott. But Ezekiel Elliott, again, even if you buy into a lot of this, where is he contract wise? Is he maybe not going to be with the Cowboys at some point in the future? Or, man, look at all the tread that's been taken off of his tires. He's going to fall off earlier. Even if you're buying into some of those that I don't buy into at all, then you still, though, have to go into the marketplace as, again, if I received offers and obviously made a deal somewhere else, then that means shopping around. Shopping around is great in Dynasty, especially when you have something appealing like an Ezekiel Elliott. You got to shop around, see who's interested. Aim high is the other thing.
Why, Chad, are you saying that you could have made an offer that was better than this for Ezekiel Elliott in this particular league?
I'm guessing I might have. I might have been able to. But here's the other part. So you're selling the best player. So have a good gauge and awareness level when you are doing that, because that means you can ask for a lot of things. If you are going to rebuild and retool, that's fine. But you need to aim high in the top piece, and you need to get high level, as you said, betting on the right type of profiles or getting higher level rookie picks. There's a lot of different ways to do it. But here's the other part that really bugs me. You added to Ezekiel Elliott. In a 2-quarterback league, you obviously value quarterbacks. You're paying up for Josh Allen. You may be the highest person in the whole world on Josh Allen. That's fine. That is okay. But what's not okay is adding Jameis Winston, adding Phillip Rivers. You got a current starter, and Jameis Winston is highly likely to be an NFL starter for at least one season in the future. So you added both of those things. So now you've got so many ways to lose this deal, in addition to Jameis Winston in 12 to 24 months could be a more valuable dynasty asset than Josh Allen. That is within the realm of outcomes of this deal, and it has nothing to do with Ezekiel Elliott and nothing to do with the 1 to 2 year starting opportunity of Phillip Rivers. And so you have so many ways to lose this deal. I mean, we could talk about it for another 5 minutes, but I think those are some of the big points and the dangers of trading, even if it's someone you don't like, someone you're cooling on in Ezekiel Elliott. Even if all that is true, you still got to have a sense of the market and be, I'm the belle of the ball, and I'm going to shop around, but I'm aiming high and I'm not taking less. And you know what? It's May. You don't have to sell Ezekiel Elliott anytime soon. It's okay. You can find the right deal for you, and it doesn't have to be in the next 3 days.
Yeah, and I think a great takeaway from that particular trade, especially in a rebuild, if you are rebuilding, you don't have to make the deal right now. Whether that is, and you see this, there's a lot of people suggesting, hey, Julio Jones is a sell. That's a better sell in season, right? That's a better sell when he's productive. And
Would you still sell if you're contending? What if you're 4-2 halfway through the year? Are you still selling Julio Jones?
Right. I wouldn't be, right. And he's gotten to the point where he's going to just be more productive than he is valuable at this point in his career.
What we always say, though, is see how the season goes, right? I mean, if you start out 0-4, sure, shop Ezekiel Elliott. Like, he's actually holding you back from maybe getting better in the future. Those points could be hurting you. But what if you start out 2-2, 3-1, and things are looking good? You got a couple rookies developing, or some players you weren't expecting. So be open to those possibilities, as opposed to entrenching yourself in a lot lower likelihood that you're going to contend right now by making a trade like this in May.
Yeah, and I don't think we're particularly good at estimating how good our team's going to be 4 months out, let alone in August. So there's a lot of randomness that goes on in how good our teams are going to be. So be open to the possibility that you're actually better than you think. Don't take a loss. Don't take a loss on a player in May, I guess is the key point.
Yeah. So this other one that I wanted to discuss is a top rookie pick. So it is a stock one quarterback format. If you hear us say stock PPR, it's going to be one quarterback, no tight end premiums for future reference. 104. So this is right in the right downtown, right down the main thoroughfare there of getting a look at least two of those big five running backs, and traded for Austin Eckler, Deontay Johnson, Benny Snell, and 203. So you're still getting a pick back. We mentioned that early second round zone being potentially juicy. And one thing you and I have talked about a little bit, Jordan, is sort of the divide between, boy, Austin Eckler, you kind of look at where he goes in startup drafts, and it seems like it's in that, maybe not a top 2 or 3 rookie pick, but boy, 104, 105, 106. And yet there's this divide. Good luck getting that in an existing league. Well, here we go. We got our example right here of Austin Eckler. You're adding to it a little bit, and you get yourself 104. This is one of the better returns for Austin Eckler I've seen. Yet you are dealing a player coming off of a career year, top 5, top 6 PPR season. Deontay Johnson, I'll say also, Jordan, is red hot. There are some out there that think he is the next coming, but he is that dicey wide receiver, right? Of like, ooh, there's some promise here, but the odds of them putting it together and putting it out for a top 12 or even maybe top 18, top 20 season is not overtly high, even after a year one of promise. So you are getting, with trading 104, Eckler, Deontay Johnson, who you could probably flip, honestly, for a later first. If I had to guess, you could just take Deontay Johnson right now and maybe get 203 and Deontay Johnson, get back into 108, 107, maybe get Jalen Reagor. What are your thoughts on this trade?
Yeah, I'm sort of with you. I don't love the other players on it, right? So I don't love Deontay Johnson, a player that's going right next to Deontay Johnson in startup ADP, and in the real drafts that I'm tracking, post NFL draft, Brandon Aiyuk, right? So sort of what you mentioned there in terms of rookie cost, that falls in line with being that early second round valuation that you're getting on him. I'd feel much better about getting that as a piece for 104 in terms of Brandon Aiyuk, or the pick, whatever it is, 202 or whatever the pick spot would be there. I'd feel better about that than Deontay Johnson. I think it's fair. It would depend a little bit. I think I like 104 better than Austin Eckler. And I see some of these guys as I see Deontay Johnson more as a throw-in piece than I think the market would. Same thing with Benny Snell. 203, I mean, depending on what my pick situation is, that might be more valuable in terms of a couple of target players that I have in that range. I think it's fair, and it would matter a little bit on team construct to me.
Yeah, I think when you break it down, if you say, wow, I mean, after this trade, could you get 107, 108 for Austin Eckler? Could you get, 201, 202 for Deontay Johnson? I mean, that's a trade that, you can love somebody at 104. You can love a J.K. Dobbins or a Cam Akers that might be there for you at 4. But man, if you were able to get, a Judy or a Lamb or a Reagor plus a couple of those early seconds. But again, now what are you doing? You're making a trade depending on you flipping some of the pieces you got. And that's always a dangerous road.
It's easier said than done.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. If you assume it's still a room of, you can't deal it back to the owner that you just traded with. So you're dealing with now 10 other owners, and maybe they already got shopped Austin Eckler or Deontay Johnson. You don't know the history before making this trade. So you may have to, quote unquote, settle. I mean, maybe you have to take 201 for Austin Eckler. If you're truly committed to, let me just get a bunch of picks from all the assets I just got, then again, it could look suboptimal. And the other part is the roster spots, right? Benny Snell could be a cut for you depending on the depth. Deontay Johnson, you might be like, he's my wide receiver 7. So what value, if I can't trade him, now I'm kind of stuck with him if he's not one of your guys and a clear-cut target. I know, Jordan, if you ever make a trade and you kind of take on, I have this league, I took on Duke Johnson, like just as a literal add-on to a deal. I have been trying to sell him. I literally asked for a 1-pick upgrade from it was 201 to 112 and 206 to 205. He's been on my roster for 12 to 14 full months now. I am close to dropping that guy. It is so bad. So trust me, the whole rostering a player you don't actually like in Dynasty is a dangerous game. You feel like you're chained. You almost feel like you're in prison a little bit, because now it's becoming not your team. You kind of begrudgingly. That's why I always say, if you're trying to even out a trade with players, get one of your guys. Even if you're kind of going down in perceived value, get someone you believe in and someone you want to see on your roster in that particular league, because, you take one or two of these guys and they become albatross, and it just, so I'm not saying Benny Snell is absolutely one of those guys for you, or Deontay Johnson, but the point is really be hesitant about like, oh, I'm going to take someone and flip them. I mean, you may be holding for a while. They may be dropping in value. It may be a thing about your league that the market value does not match maybe the perception elsewhere.
Yeah, that Duke Johnson thing's like the Naheem Hines thing from a couple years ago, where we both rostered Naheem Hines and we're like, we don't like it, and we just couldn't do anything. He just sat on our roster. I'll say as like a final takeaway on that trade, I think what you said is exactly right. When you get this situation, when you are in a trade and you're saying, hey, listen, I can make this trade and then sell these players, sell them off in pieces for more than this trade is worth, I'd be very careful on that. And it's the same thing with drafting players in a startup draft that are falling and saying, listen, I can flip them later for a better price. You have to presume the market in this particular league is cool on those players, right? Especially when people are passing them in drafts, or you're going to say, hey, listen, it'll be an uptick and I can sell them for a profit later on. The league has already told you what they think. And if you're getting this trade where you're getting guys like Deontay Johnson and Benny Snell, and you're getting them in this and expecting, hey, I can sell them for a profit, you should be careful, because you're probably not the only person that this trade was made to, and you're the one that's operating actually in the black box. The person that's selling you knows that, right? They know what the value is because they've been shopping him around. You have to presume that. So be careful when you're making that type of trade, because the person that's making it with you probably knows what the true cost is better than you do.
Yeah, when you were talking, it reminded me of some of those corporate deals where you buy sort of a lagging company and you're like, oh, I'm going to break it apart. And, you see some of those, greed is good. I'm trying to think of that Wall Street,
Gecko, right?
Yeah, Gordon Gecko. But you kind of think about like, oh, I'm going to buy this company, split it all apart. I'll sell the factory. I'll sell the components. I'll do all this stuff. And in the best case, yeah, that sounds great. And we just kind of broke down the best case of a trade like that. And yet a lot of times you can just be left with this old factory and, all these pieces that, it was fool's errand, in terms of trying to think that you can shine them all up and trade it, sell it for parts, basically. It is the dangerous game that you're playing dynasty wise, obviously lower stakes than the multi-million and billion-dollar world of the corporate empire. But that was sort of the equivalency I thought of. Do want to mention that, again, the Football Guys shows on your listening apps to subscribe, rate, and review this Football Guys, the Audible, IDP shows, Sigmund Bloom's On the Couch, a number of podcasts, including ours, DFS, Power Grid, all under one bat channel. So you can subscribe, rate, and review there. Do want to mention also the FFPC Football Guys Players Championship. I've mentioned it before, but you get a $35 team. So free, if you can get a free entry, do that. That is absolutely something that when you register, drafts are going on now. That link is myffpc.com/footballguys. What we talked about this episode, we talked about the top rookie wide receivers at the Open. We talked about the types of profiles and apply this to other players, and Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry out there where there's not an accurate perception and valuation in the marketplace. We talked about Jordan's rankings in that regard, available at footballguys.com. Also, dynasty trading, a lot of things to unpack with a single dynasty trade in terms of how to make more successful deals, the profiles to look for, but also how to navigate that trade market. I am Chad Parsons. He's Jordan McNamara. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty leagues.